Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. Congress has averted another threatened government shutdown, passing a short-term spending bill just hours before the Wednesday midnight deadline. Unanimous votes by Democrats in both chambers helped overcome Republican opposition, many of whom sought to defund Planned Parenthood, to no avail. The stopgap expires in 10 weeks. By then, party leaders will be looking to negotiate a more expansive budget deal to carry past the 2016 elections. It will also be the first major test of the new Speaker of the House, whoever he or she might be. Republicans will caucus this coming Thursday and vote on their choice to replace John Boehner, who is resigning at the end of the month. Earlier this week, Planned Parenthood made its first congressional appearance since being embarrassed by an undercover investigation exposing its practice of harvesting and selling aborted baby parts. However, the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee focused its hearing on the abortion giant's spending habits and not the videos seen by millions. Republican Chairman Jason Chaffetz of Utah insisted that Planned Parenthood does not need federal money. He pointed out that it spends plenty on what he called exorbitant salaries, travel expenses, parties, and lobbying. Cecile Richards, Planned Parenthood's president, whose annual salary is nearly $600,000, insisted that taxpayer money is used to provide testing for sexually transmitted disease, contraceptives, and other health care for women. She said none of it is used for political activity. Richards also admitted that Planned Parenthood does not conduct mammograms, as has been widely reported for years. Regarding the harvesting of baby body parts, Richards said that overall, those services are minuscule and, quote, Planned Parenthood is proud of its limited role in supporting fetal tissue research, end quote. Planned Parenthood receives around $450 million in federal money annually, much of it through Medicaid. That's about a third of its entire budget. And in a move that has earned him the scorn of some in the media, Pope Francis met with Kim Davis in Washington last week. Davis is the county clerk in Kentucky who was jailed recently for refusing to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. After initially remaining silent, then declining to confirm the meeting, the Vatican on Wednesday acknowledged the private meeting between Davis and the Pope. She and her husband met Pope Francis for about 15 minutes at the Vatican Embassy last Thursday, following the Pope's address to Congress. Davis's lawyer said the Pope embraced her, offered encouragement, and his prayers.
He wanted to thank her for her courage, and he also specifically said to stay strong. Pope Francis held out his hands when he asked her to pray for him, and she clasped his hands, and she said she would, and she in turn asked the Pope to pray for her, and he said he will.
On his return flight to Rome on Sunday, when asked whether a government official could conscientiously object to issuing marriage licenses to gay couples, the Pope said, conscientious objection is a right that is a part of every human right. If a person does not allow others to be a conscientious objector, he denies a right. And with a papal visit to the Central African Republic just around the corner, at least 42 people have been killed there after an escalation of sectarian violence. Clashes between Muslim and Christian militias were sparked after the killing of a Muslim taxi driver this past week in Bangui, the nation's capital. Tens of thousands have been forced to flee their homes, and a nighttime curfew is now in effect. A UN spokesman says the latest outbreak is the worst violence in the region since the conflict in the Central African Republic began 2 years ago, when a Muslim rebel faction took control of the country in March of 2013. Pope Francis will be making a 6-day trip to Kenya, Uganda, and the Central African Republic beginning on November 25th. And could a papal visit to China be in the offing? Well, Pope Francis is hopeful. On his plane ride back to Rome on Sunday, he said he would very much like to go to China, calling it a great nation that brings a great culture to the world. China offered little in return for the overture. Such a visit would be historic, a first for a Roman pontiff. On Tuesday, the communist regime's foreign minister voiced its sincere intention to continue constructive dialogue and improved relations with the Holy See. Official diplomatic relations between the Vatican and China have been suspended since the communist takeover in 1951. Tight controls over the Catholic Church and other Christian communities continue in the country. Many prelates and Christian activists there have been jailed, exiled, or are missing. Back in the U.S. on Thursday, at least 10 people were killed and more than 20 injured after a gunman opened fire at Umpqua Community College in Oregon. Students and faculty reported hearing sounds like a car backfiring. According to state police and the Attorney General, there was a single shooter, a 20-year-old male who was neutralized after exchanging fire with law enforcement officials. The community college is located in southwest Oregon. It is a 2-year school with nearly 20,000 full and part-time students. A motive for the shooting is currently being investigated via the shooter's social media postings. And it appears Vatican City is not quite heeding Pope Francis's call to welcome immigrants. In an undercover video produced by an Italian TV channel, a journalist posing as a Syrian refugee sought help.
Good morning. I'm Syrian and I'm looking for a place to sleep. They told that if I come to Vatican...
But we're a hotel, so I don't know how to help you.
He was repeatedly turned away by Vatican officials. When the reporter reminded one official of the Pope's call for charity, the official lamented, "Il Papa, it is not possible to help you." Last month, as the Syrian migrant crisis enveloped Europe, Pope Francis had called for tangible support for refugees, urging every parish in Europe to take in a migrant family, starting with the Vatican. The Vatican is hosting 2 refugee families currently. In a related note, on Thursday, the Vatican released Pope Francis's message for the 2016 World Day of Migrants. The theme chosen by Pope Francis is Migrants and Refugees Challenges, the response of the gospel of mercy. And at the mission in Carmel, California, vandals defaced a statue of the recently canonized Saint Junipero Serra. The Carmel Mission is the burial site of the 18th century California missionary. The statue of Serra, as well as gravestones and other statues of those of European descent, were found toppled over and splashed with paint on Sunday. Saint of Genocide was written on one stone. Some Native American activist groups associate Father Serra and the early California missions with the destruction of their culture. At his canonization mass this past week in D.C., Pope Francis called Saint Serra the embodiment of a church which goes forth, which sets out to bring everywhere the reconciling tenderness of God. And finally, a little backgrounder on the upcoming Synod on the Family and a thank you. So many of you wrote to us this week commending our coverage of Pope Francis's visit to Cuba and the U.S. We could not have done it without you and the support of Mother Angelica and her sisters. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge our team. Chris Edwards, James Faulkner, Christina Kelly, our crew, and all the directors in D.C., Philly, and Birmingham who pulled it all together. Also, my papal posse, Robert Royal and Father Jerry Murray, who made the whole visit such a pleasure and really a learning experience, I think. Now, while we were covering every move of the Pope, there were a few moments that I want to call your attention to because I believe they will impact the next 3 weeks in Rome. Remember, at the top of our papal visit, I said we would be on the lookout for indicators of where the Pope's mind was before the start of the Synod on the Family. 2 quick quotes to bear in mind that might be instructive. On September 27th, during the Pope's visit with his bishops at St. Charles Borromeo Seminary, he urged them to, quote, seek out, to accompany, to lift up, to bind up the wounds of the time, to look at things realistically with the eyes of one who feels called to action, to pastoral conversion. Later, he warned the bishops, a Christianity which does little in practice while incessantly explaining its teachings is dangerously unbalanced. I would even say stuck in a vicious circle. Now, for some context, we know from the Synod last year that there was a titanic clash between cardinals advocating mercy for divorced and remarried Catholics seeking communion, notably Cardinal Casper, and those who argued that the Church teaching on the indissolubility of marriage could not be disturbed. Embracing a fast pass to annulments would destroy the permanence of marriage, they said. Now, some of the defenders of church teaching were derided as rigorists. Now, fast forward to the Pope's final Mass in Philadelphia. Reflecting on readings concerning Moses and Jesus, he said, the gospel had a surprise. Quote, here is the surprise. Moses and Jesus both rebuke those closest to them for being so narrow. Jesus encountered hostility from people who did not accept what he said and did. His openness to the honest and sincere faith of many men and women who were not part of God's chosen people seemed intolerable. But the temptation to be scandalized by the freedom of God, who sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous alike, bypassing bureaucracy, officialdom, and inner circles, threatens the authenticity of faith. Hence, it must be vigorously rejected, end quote. Now, will the Pope rebuke those closest to him for being so narrow and not open to the movements of the Spirit at the upcoming Synod? Will he vigorously reject those, like the African bishops, who've already stated their intention to defend church teaching on marriage? We will find out together in the days ahead. We'll be offering detailed analysis of this Synod that you will not find anywhere else, as we have for nearly 2 years. The papal posse and others will join me in the weeks ahead to dig deep into what the Synod means and where it's headed. Now, one note of caution. The Synod is merely an advisory body. Whatever is discussed, whatever the majority says or doesn't say, will not be the last word. How to proceed will finally be the decision of the Holy Father alone. And we'll cover that for you as well.